John stepped into the kitchen, where the sweltering heat struck newcomers like a slap to the face. The air was thick with the smell of grease. Pans clanged harshly against each other. Oil hissed and spat as if the room itself meant to swallow anyone not built for it. The man who once signed multi-million-dollar contracts and walked red carpets at international conferences now wore a grease-stained apron, his expensive suit buried beneath a different world. No one in that kitchen knew the clumsy man at the grill was in fact a CEO worth over $40 million. To them, he was just a new hire, awkward, unfamiliar. But for John, this was the first time he had touched a reality that tidy reports and numbers on paper had never fully captured. Amid the flurry of busy staff, one figure stood out, not for any glamour, but for a near surreal endurance. Ivy appeared with 4 heavy trays in her hands, moving briskly as if their weight meant nothing. Sweat slid down her temples, yet her smile never cracked. She moved as though the entire restaurant could function only by keeping pace with her steps. And perhaps that was the truth. John's eyes happened to land on the timesheet tacked beside an old clock. The printed line was clear: Ivy Martinez, part-time, 18 hours, week. His heart stalled. He had seen her there every day, opening early, closing late, more than 80 hours in a week. Yet on paper, everything was reduced to a cold, cruelly small number. A heaviness pressed against John's chest. None of the contracts he had ever signed had revealed this. A human being, pouring out youth and life to keep a place from collapsing, erased in her own employment records. An invisible pillar the system casually killed with a few digits. And the first question flashed through his mind: why? Why can a system turn one person's devotion into fraudulent lines of data? A sharp crash rang out when a young busser slipped. His tray of glasses shattered across the floor. Shards scattered like pieces of confidence crushed to dust. He froze, eyes wide with panic, glancing toward the door as if ready to flee. Instantly, the manager's shrill bark split the air. "Useless! Just get out already!" The whole kitchen went rigid. Fear spread faster than flames on a gas stove. But before those cutting words could land fully on the boy, Ivy was there. Without a word of defense, she knelt, scooping the glass with her own apron, her small frame shielding him like a human shield. Her voice was a whisper, soft but steady. "It's okay. I'm here." The boy trembled, but his eyes steadied. With nothing more than her calm presence, Ivy did what yelling never could. She restored courage to a frightened heart. Minutes later, Ivy was back with a cleaning cloth. 3 chaotic tables, normally a 15-minute job, she cleared in barely 5. No complaints, no pause. Her movements flowed like water, as if her hands were made to mend the mess others left behind. John tried to keep pace, but his hands shook with each plate. Forks and knives were misplaced. The tray tilted in his grip. He was clumsy, a stranger to this world, and he truly was. Yet Ivy didn't frown. She stepped close, adjusted how he held the tray, her voice gentle, like a patient older sister guiding a younger brother. "Don't tense up. Let the weight spread evenly." In that moment, John felt something strange. He had managed hundreds of employees, made decisions worth tens of millions. But no one had ever given him this kind of steadiness, a quiet reassurance born not of authority, but of kindness. Ivy didn't just work. She mended. Not only chairs, tables, plates, but also the spirits that cracked under invisible pressure. In the middle of the dinner rush, Ivy found a rare moment to breathe. She leaned against a darkened wall in the corner of the kitchen, holding a piece of stale bread, its edges hardened like stone. No table, no chair, just her and the scrap of food to keep her going. Nearby, as John wiped down a counter, he caught the faint buzz of her phone. Ivy answered quickly, her voice lowered, trembling with guilt. "Don't wait for me. Eat first, okay? I'll be late again tonight." Just a few words, but John could hear the weight behind them, the echo of broken promises repeated hundreds of times. On the other end, perhaps it was her little sister, swallowing disappointment in silence. Ivy ended the call, chewed the tough bread hurriedly, and never once let her eyes drift from the dining room, as though even her breathing was chained to the restaurant. Before she had finished, an impatient guest waved sharply for attention. Without hesitation, Ivy shoved the remaining crumbs into her apron pocket, adjusted her smile, and walked over as if she had just started her shift fresh. That smile was bright enough that no one could guess it was stitched together with scraps of bread and missed dinners. Beside John, a dishwasher muttered, half in awe, half in bitterness, "If it weren't for her, this place would have collapsed a long time ago." John froze. He could see it plainly. Ivy wasn't just doing her job. She was holding up the entire rotting structure of the restaurant with her own youth and strength, a broken system propped up by one person's silent sacrifice. In that moment, John no longer felt like an undercover CEO. He felt like an outsider, forced to witness a cruel truth. The survival of a whole business rested on the shoulders of someone erased from the records. The gas flame flared, oil spitting into the air like sparks. John fumbled with the spatula, his hand, once so steady signing contracts, now trembling in the furnace of the kitchen. In a split second of carelessness, a drop of boiling oil landed on his forearm. The sharp sting made him gasp, jerking back in pain. But the kitchen didn't slow down. Orders were shouted, pans clashed, knives thudded. John stood frozen in the whirlwind, lost and alone. Then Ivy appeared, silent as if she had been beside him all along. She pressed a cold, damp cloth gently onto his burn, her voice low and soothing, almost like a secret. "You'll get used to it, don't worry." Her fleeting smile was gone almost as quickly as it came, yet it was enough to ease the burn, as though her compassion itself carried away the heat. At that instant, John realized something profound. All his years commanding boardrooms, making decisions that shook companies, none of it had ever made him feel as small as he did now. Not because of weakness, but because of the quiet strength radiating from this young woman in a stained apron. Ivy didn't complain. She didn't boast. She simply adjusted how he held the spatula, patient and steady, like an older sister guiding a clumsy sibling. Then, without pause, she slipped back into the relentless rhythm of her work, as if helping others was just part of her shift. John watched her go, a strange ache tightening in his chest. He had overseen billion-dollar deals, but he had never witnessed leadership so clearly embodied in something so small. A cool cloth, a smile, a guiding hand. In that kitchen, Ivy wasn't just doing her job. She was leading through kindness, a power no financial report could ever measure. Night fell, and the fading footsteps of staff echoed as they left. Outside the door, laughter carried lightly, relief at having shed a heavy burden. Inside, the restaurant grew still, lit only by the dim yellow glow over sticky tables, greasy stains on the floor, and chairs left scattered. This should have been the end of everything, but Ivy was still there. No one asked her to stay. No one would record it. She bent low, scraping hardened gum from beneath the tables. Her calloused hands moved steadily, without a hint of complaint, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. John stood by the sink, pretending to scrub a pan, but his eyes never left her. He watched as she polished each tabletop until it gleamed, lined the chairs neatly in rows, adjusted every cloth, then quietly wiped down the counters. Every movement was deliberate, patient, and unexplainably devoted. There was no audience, no praise, no extra pay, only silence, and the sound of her cloth sliding across wood. John glanced at the clock. Ivy's shift had officially ended hours ago. Yet here she was, doing the work of a manager, a cleaner, an invisible leader. And suddenly he understood. All those missing hours in the reports were right here. This unpaid labor that kept the place from falling apart. Every stain she scrubbed away, every chair she aligned, was like another brick she quietly laid to keep a crumbling foundation standing. And John's chest grew heavy with the weight of it. He had once believed efficiency lived in spreadsheets, profit margins, and quarterly reports. But now he saw efficiency standing in front of him, in the form of a weary young woman who refused to stop working, even when no one would ever notice. In that silence, John realized, Ivy was the unseen pillar holding the entire house upright. Yet the house itself had never acknowledged she existed. It was late at night. The final click of the lock echoed sharply, signaling the end of a shift that had stretched more than 12 hours. The managers drove off in their cars, a few staff called for taxis. Only Ivy remained, quietly wheeling out an old bicycle, its paint chipped, the frame mottled with rust. The wheels creaked with every turn, as if they, too, were as exhausted as their owner. From behind the doorway, John watched. For a moment, he wanted to step forward, but his feet felt heavy, pinned by shame. He, a man who could buy a luxury car with a single signature, was watching the pillar of his restaurant ride home on a fragile, squeaking bicycle. Ivy pedaled into the night, her thin figure swallowed by the yellow haze of streetlights. The city after dark was not gentle. Empty streets, harsh winds, the roar of passing cars carrying unseen dangers. Yet Ivy showed no fear. On her sweat-streaked face lingered only a quiet acceptance that this was the only road she had. At a small corner shop, she stopped at a pharmacy. From a distance, John saw her place a few coins on the counter. Not vitamins, not special prescriptions, just a cheap box of painkillers. Her hand trembled slightly as she slipped it into her worn backpack, as though the action had become routine, a ritual of survival. When she returned to her bike, John noticed the way her slight shoulders seemed to rise, carrying yet another day's weight. The chain screeched as the wheels turned, cutting through the shadows of the night. John stood frozen beneath the streetlight. In his mind, two images overlapped. On one side, a penthouse with fine wine and medicine, stocked in abundance. On the other, Ivy, with a frayed backpack, a box of cheap pills, and legs pumping an old bike into the dark. The contrast cut into him like a blade. This wasn't just unfair. It was the raw truth of a system that devoured youth and health to decorate someone else's luxury. For the first time, John felt ashamed of his own signature. The same signatures that had built the world Ivy now struggled to endure. The sky had only just begun to pale when the city was still half asleep. Yet Ivy was already at the restaurant. No alarm clock, no reminder, just a quiet sense of duty guiding her. She slid the old key into the lock, pushed open the heavy creaking door, and stepped into a room still thick with the smell of grease from the night before. In the silence, she began her work, switching on the coffee machine, wiping down tables still streaked with grime, straightening chairs, replacing stained tablecloths. Her movements were quick, practiced, as though her body had long been programmed to repeat this routine day after day. There was no clock in, no witness, no recognition. When John entered, expecting an empty restaurant, he was startled to find her already there, holding the place together. A fresh pot of coffee steamed, tablecloths lay smooth, and silverware was arranged neatly as if awaiting inspection. He asked softly, half surprised, half concerned, "Why are you here so early? Your shift doesn't start for hours." Ivy looked up, her tired smile still warm. "If I prepare now, it'll be easier later. It saves everyone the rush." Her answer was simple, but to John, it cut like a blade. He knew with certainty, every second she gave this morning would never appear on any timesheet. No pay, no acknowledgement, no name recorded. She crouched down to scrub another stain from the floor, her knees pressed to the cold ground. Already, sweat dotted her forehead, even though the day had barely begun. John stood still. For years, he had believed productivity was measured in graphs, profit margins, and tidy reports. But here, before his eyes, productivity had taken human form. In a young woman arriving early, working in silence, and never being paid. In the quiet of that dawn, John no longer felt like a disguised CEO. He felt like an unwilling witness to a brutal truth. This entire system lived on the invisible hours of Ivy. By evening, the restaurant once again turned into a storm. Tables were packed, orders came in rapid bursts, demanding customers waved impatiently. At the coffee counter, Sarah, a young waitress, kept glancing at the clock, her hands trembling as if each passing minute cut deeper into her chest. Finally, she gasped, her eyes wet with panic. "If it goes past 9, the babysitter charges double. I can't afford it." Before John could even process, Ivy was already there. She placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder, her voice firm but soft. "Go. Your child needs you more than here. I'll handle this." Sarah hesitated, her lips trembling as if to protest, but Ivy silenced her with a resolute shake of the head. With only a choked thank you, Sarah hurriedly gathered her things and left, leaving behind a mountain of work. And as if it were natural, Ivy absorbed it all. 3 tables yet to be served, several drinks still waiting, customers on the verge of complaining. She moved tirelessly, her smile intact, her tone kind with every guest. No one in the dining room realized that one person was doing the work of two. Behind the counter, John gripped the spatula tightly. He saw it with painful clarity. Ivy's kindness, something that should be honored, was being twisted by the system into a tool for exploitation. Her sacrifices were no longer acts of generosity. They had become expectations. Every time she covered for someone, she silently chained another weight onto herself. He watched her turn, a tray balanced heavily in her hands. Yet her voice still warm as she thanked a customer, her eyes still bright, though her back was soaked with sweat. And in that moment, a piercing thought struck John. What others called goodness was slowly being eroded into a trap. She wasn't just protecting a coworker, she was masking the truth that this entire system survived only by feeding on the endless sacrifices of people like Ivy. The clock struck exactly 10 p.m. The chaos remained, dishes piled high, the kitchen a mess, the bathrooms unclean, grease stains across the floor. Yet the manager's bark sliced through the air like a blade. "Clock out, all of you, swipe your cards and go." One by one, the machine beeped coldly, absolute and final. On paper, the shift was over. In reality, the work still towered, unfinished. John froze, the heavy spatula still in his hand. He watched as his coworkers quietly swiped their cards, then drifted back into the kitchen as if nothing had changed. The lights stayed on, water kept running, hands continued scrubbing. The only difference was this. From that moment on, every hour had been erased from the system. Ivy didn't flinch. She pulled on gloves, knelt by the bathroom floor, and scrubbed tiles with a patience so chilling it seemed inhuman. As if she had long accepted this ritual, as if unpaid labor was simply part of breathing. John bent down too, wiping counters, his chest tightening with every stroke. He, a CEO, was now complicit in the very fraud his system had created. Each swipe of his cloth felt like a confession. He had allowed silence to harden into law. The rasp of brushes against tile filled the room, mingling with the weary breaths of staff. No one spoke, but everyone knew. These minutes were stolen time, taken with no one daring to resist. John glanced at Ivy. Her small frame sagged under fatigue, yet a faint smile lingered on her lips, fragile, nearly breaking. In that look, he saw not just an employee, he saw a living shield, absorbing the blows so others wouldn't face them directly. A wave of fury surged in his chest, but for the first time, his anger wasn't at clumsy staff or flawed reports. It was aimed at the system itself, the one that had turned theft into policy and silence into command. In the cramped break room, the sickly yellow glow of fluorescent lights fell across exhausted faces. No clanging pans, no noisy customers, only heavy breathing and the stale smell of sweat clinging to the air. In one corner, a few employees huddled close, voices low, as if even the walls might be listening. "We all owe Ivy," one whispered. "If she didn't carry this place, it would have collapsed long ago," another added, eyes darting nervously around. But who dares speak up? Who dares stand out? If she falls, we all fall with her." The words dropped into the room like lead, suffocating. No one dared to raise their voice. No one dared to meet another's eyes. Only fear and dependence lingered, weaving silence tighter around them. John stood at the doorway, a stack of plates in his hands, pretending to busy himself. But each word reached him, pounding against his chest. He heard the truth clearly. Ivy wasn't just a hard worker. She had become the final pillar holding everyone upright, and if that pillar crumbled, they would all collapse together. Just then, Ivy walked in with a rag in her hands. Instantly, the room went silent. Those who had whispered bowed their heads, fumbling with shoes with empty cups, anything to avoid her gaze. Ivy asked nothing. She looked at no one. She simply started wiping the tables, polishing the worn wood with the same quiet devotion as always. John's throat tightened. No thanks. No helping hands. They all let her bend her back once again, as though it were inevitable. She wasn't just carrying the work. She was carrying their cowardice. And in that suffocating silence, John saw the truth. Ivy was no longer just an employee. She had become a scapegoat, a sacrifice the others silently accepted. too afraid to change anything. He wanted to shout, to ask, "Why do you leave her alone in this?" But he swallowed it down, just like them, and his own silence pressed heavier on his conscience than ever before. At last, the restaurant sank into silence. Neon lights flickered faintly, casting a cold, buzzing glow. Chairs were stacked, tables scrubbed, doors locked tight. Only one small figure remained in the empty room. Ivy. She slumped on a hard plastic chair, head tilted back, lips parted in a restless half-sleep. Her thin jacket, frayed at the cuffs, was no shield against the night chill. Dark circles carved shadows beneath her eyes, etching premature lines of exhaustion onto a face far too young. John stood just a few steps away, still holding a rag in his hand, frozen. What he saw before him was not an employee, but a living testimony to injustice. A woman who had kept an entire machine running for 12 relentless hours, rewarded only with an uncomfortable chair and a few stolen minutes of sleep under cruel fluorescent light. In his eyes, Ivy looked like a candle burning down to its stub, still glowing, still giving light to others, yet its wax nearly gone, its flame trembling, and no one added fuel to keep it alive. John clenched his fists. He had once looked at financial reports as great achievements, once felt pride in profit margins and clean numbers. But now all of it shattered against this image, a human being giving away her youth and strength, only to collapse into a fitful sleep on a plastic chair. His chest ached, grief mingled with fury. He understood then, if this continued, it would not only be Ivy who broke, the entire system would collapse with her. Close to midnight, when most of the staff had already left, John wandered through the break room. His eyes stopped at a row of battered metal lockers. One door was bent, its rusty lock so weak it gave way with a light tug. He hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside there were no coats, no shoes, only a thick notebook, its cover worn, the edges of the pages curled from being turned too often. John opened it. Neat, careful handwriting filled the lines. Dates, hours, minutes cut, shifts shortened. April 12th, -4 hours. May 6th, lost 3 hours. June 18th, shift lasted 11 hours, recorded as 7. The deeper he read, the heavier his chest grew. Each entry was like a blade carved into someone's body. In the margins, the handwriting changed. Angrier, jagged, scrawled in haste. Clock out or lose your shift. Stop asking. Want to keep your job? Stay quiet. These were not just notes. They were evidence. They were threats, captured and preserved. John could almost picture Ivy, sitting alone after a grueling shift, still forcing herself to write it all down. Not to complain, but to keep the truth alive. He closed the notebook, his hands trembling. He was no longer staring at suspicions. He was holding an indictment, written in sweat, youth, and silent defiance. At that moment, he understood. Ivy was not submissive as she appeared. She was fighting, quietly, methodically, with pen and paper. And now, by finding this notebook, John had become part of her battle. The manager's office was small, stifling with the smell of cheap whiskey and sweat. Papers lay scattered across the desk. Rick sat slouched in his chair, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, yet gleaming with smug satisfaction. He shoved a glass across the table toward John, his voice slurred but certain. "This is how you really make money. If you want to survive in this industry, you cut where it needs cutting." John stayed silent, staring at the untouched drink. Rick sneered, leaning closer, lowering his voice, though every word hissed sharp and clear. "Hours? I make them clock out early. On paper, it's spotless. In reality, they keep working until the job's done. 2 hours, 3 hours, who cares? What matters is the numbers look perfect. Headquarters sees me as a genius." He tipped back the glass, laughing harshly, the sound grating against the cramped walls. John clenched his fists under the table, knuckles whitening as he fought the storm rising inside him. Rick went on, his tone dripping with scorn. "Those servers don't dare complain. Single moms, broke students, immigrants without papers. They're more afraid of hunger than of being exploited. If I want them to work, they work. Simple." Each word stabbed into John. In his mind flashed Ivy's image, dozing on a plastic chair, smiling through pain for customers, carrying burdens that weren't hers. Rick called it a strategy. John saw it for what it was: theft, brutal and deliberate. Rick slammed his glass down, chuckling darkly, spitting out his creed. That's power. Hunger turns people into tools, and I sleep just fine at night knowing they'll never open their mouths. John didn't respond, but in his eyes burned a different fire. He knew then, this wasn't suspicion anymore. It was confession, raw and undeniable. Rick's glass was already half empty, but his mouth hadn't tired. He leaned forward toward John, eyes glazed, his voice rasping with a metallic edge. You've seen that girl Ivy, right? Thinks she's some kind of saint. Always smiling, always picking up everyone else's slack. Pathetic! He burst out laughing, a hoarse, mocking sound. She actually thinks she's saving anyone? She's just digging her own grave. Keep working for free, keep staying silent, and one day she'll burn out completely, left with nothing but cracked hands and a broken body. He spat on the floor, lowering his voice, now dripping with venomous contempt. She's a fool, a sacrifice no one needs, no one remembers. Just a tool for me to squeeze dry until there's nothing left. John froze, every word striking him like a hammer blow. In his mind, he saw Ivy shielding the trembling busboy, comforting a young mother rushing home to her child, quietly scrubbing tables long after her shift had ended. To John, those moments were proof of strength and compassion. To Rick, they were nothing but a joke to exploit. Under the table, John's fist tightened, nails digging into his palms. One word, one slip, and his disguise as a rookie employee would shatter. His long-suppressed fury would erupt, but he forced it down, swallowing the fire. In Rick's eyes, Ivy was disposable, but in John's heart, she was a torch, the soul keeping the place from collapsing completely. And in that moment, he swore silently. This man would pay for every insult he had hurled at her. The dinner rush had passed. Only the hum of the exhaust fan and the weary glow of overhead lights remained. Ivy sat in the corner, cradling a chipped coffee cup. Her eyes were deep, and this time, it wasn't just fatigue, it was something heavier. John sat across from her, still keeping the mask of a rookie worker. He was about to say something reassuring when Ivy spoke first, her voice low, like a confession long held back. I once had a sister who worked here. John froze. She was pregnant, but she still came in every day, still smiled, still tried to carry heavy shifts just to keep her job. Ivy's voice trembled, each word sharp as a blade. Then they cut her hours, said she was too slow, too weak, and then they threw her out completely, even her last paycheck. They kept it. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the cup. A long breath escaped her lips, part restraint, part fire. She begged them, just wanted that small sum to buy milk for the baby. But they laughed in her face. Eerie, John's throat tightened. In that moment, Ivy wasn't just the thin waitress who shielded coworkers and smiled through exhaustion. She was a fighter, carrying someone else's pain. Ivy finally looked him in the eyes, unflinching. That's why I'm still here. Every unpaid hour, every extra shift I take, every page I write in that notebook, it's for her, to claim justice. Not just for her, but for everyone who's had their voice stolen. John sat in silence, shaken. He had thought Ivy was simply a martyr, blind in her self-sacrifice. But now he saw her sacrifice had purpose. Behind her quiet endurance was a fire that could not be extinguished. And in that moment, John understood. This fight was no longer hers alone. He had stepped into it, and he would have to see it through to the end. Ivy quietly pulled a worn notebook from her old canvas bag and laid it on the table in the dim kitchen. Its cover was scuffed, its edges curled, but inside the pages were lined with words written with almost obsessive care. She flipped through slowly, her finger pausing on each line, her voice low but firm. April 12th, cut 4 hours. May 6th, lost 3 hours. June 18th, shift lasted 11 hours, recorded as 7. John leaned in, every number striking him like an arrow. No more hunches, no more suspicions. This was evidence. Ivy lifted her gaze, her eyes blazing in the faint light. I've written it all down, not just mine. Danny's, Lisa's, Sarah's. Every stolen hour, every withheld dollar, every threat scribbled on those scraps of paper. It's all here. She turned the pages to the margins, where frantic, jagged notes scarred the paper. Clock out now or lose your shift. Don't ask again. Keep quiet if you want the job. John swallowed hard, his hand trembling as it brushed the corner of the notebook. He imagined Ivy, after endless shifts, sitting under a weak light, eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet forcing herself to record every line. Not to complain, but to preserve the truth. Ivy closed the notebook gently, resting her hand on its battered cover like sealing an oath. This isn't a diary, it's a weapon. One day they won't be able to deny it anymore. John stared at her for a long moment. He had read thick financial reports, pored over growth charts, and analyzed glowing metrics. But he had never seen a report so brutally honest, written in sweat, youth, and sheer resolve. And within him, a realization formed. This notebook could topple the entire system. Thin smoke curled in the back alley behind the restaurant. John leaned against the brick wall, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. Though he never took a drag, it was only an excuse to linger, to listen, to mask the storm raging in his chest. Beside him, Ivy rested her back against the dark wall. The night wind whipped her hair loose. Her voice cut through the chill, quiet but sharp as a blade. They think we're powerless, but power doesn't come from titles. It comes from refusing to give up. That's why I'm still here. John turned his head. In her tired eyes burned a steady flame, fiercer than anything he had seen in polished boardrooms or shareholder meetings. Here was a woman in a flour-stained apron speaking truths he had long forgotten. His lips pressed tight. Inside, he was screaming to tear off the mask. I am the one at the top. I could change this all right now. But reason restrained him. If he revealed himself too soon, Rick would cover his tracks, evidence would vanish, and Ivy's fight would be crushed. So John chose silence. But this time, it wasn't cowardice. It was a vow. Inside his chest, a voice rang out. For Ivy, for her sister, for every soul whose voice has been stolen. I will stand up. I will tear this injustice down. The cigarette, left unsmoked, dropped to the concrete. Its ember glowed faintly, then died. And in that moment, John knew. He was no longer just a witness. He had stepped into the war, and his silent vow, he would carry it until the truth was brought to light. That night, as John walked down the dim hallway behind the kitchen, he caught faint whispers spilling from the storage room. Young voices, shaky, but laced with hope. Ivy's writing it all down. Every stolen hour, every missing dollar. She has a plan. Another voice broke in, hushed but urgent. If she pulls it off, we'll finally be free. No more fear. John froze, heart pounding. He didn't dare step closer, only stood in the shadows listening. Ivy's name echoed in those whispers like a prayer, like the only thread of faith these worn-out workers still clung to. The door creaked open. Ivy walked in, arms full of clean towels. Instantly, the whispers died. Everyone lowered their heads, fidgeting with empty cups, unlaced shoes, anything to avoid her eyes. Ivy said nothing. She asked no questions. She simply set the towels down and bent to cleaning, wiping the worn surfaces with the same quiet diligence as always. But in that silence, John saw the truth. She had become their leader, though she had never claimed the title. No speeches, no declarations, just patience, sacrifice, and a fire that never went out. And because of that, they looked to her to hold them up. They kept silent, but they leaned on her to endure. From the shadows, John's chest tightened. Ivy wasn't just carrying the work. She was the soul, the fragile thread keeping the whole fabric from tearing apart completely. And a truth rose inside him, undeniable. If Ivy collapsed, everything would crumble. But if she stood strong, she could lead them all into a new dawn. Thank you for following this story with us. If you found this video inspiring or it helped you see life in a new light, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any exciting and meaningful videos in the future. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next videos. Wishing you strength and confidence on your journey.